Welcome to Focus Ontario, a public consultation and information session on designing a cooperative digital feature for managing the arts. My name is Jessa Agilo. Focus Ontario is generously supported by the Canada Council for the Arts Digital Strategy Fund and is a part of the digital transformation project Artse United, which is incubated by ArtsPond. The following is archival video from a presentation of Focus Ontario at the SAW Gallery in Ottawa on September 24, 2019. Participating facilitators for the session included myself, Jessa Agilo, as well as Artse United's co-op coach, Stephanie Guico, and design thinking lead, Margaret Lamb. Additional presentations included Artse United's technical lead, Amine from Octagram, research and evaluation coach, Kelly Hill from Hill Strategies Research, and legal coach, Andreas Kalogiannides from Aura LLP. Thanks also to co-facilitators Alana Boltwood from Metamia, Jeanne LeSage from LeSage Arts Management, Sara Meurling from Culture Think, and ArtsPond's communications and logistics assistant Michael Pereira, and associate producer Heather Wood. So kind of the frame of this presentation today is there's four components. I want to talk about the source, so where is this project coming from? What are our values and belief systems? And who is ArtsPond? Who am I and the team? And where is this kind of coming from? Then the solution that we're proposing to develop with the funding from Canada Council for the Arts. And there's four streams of activity that we're undertaking with the fund. Four simultaneous streams. So I'm going to talk about those streams and what we're actually doing. Then the final component is how you might get involved, how you might support the project. So let's dive in with the source and who we are. So ArtsPond was founded in 2014 as a grassroots organization or collective looking at systemic barriers in the industry. From a cross-sectoral, cross-disciplinary, cross-cultural framework. Our assumption is that we are better together than we are apart, and how can we address systemic issues both in traditional ground kinds of relationships as well as digital and in the cloud. So that was the first assumption. By 2016, we became an incorporated not-for-profit, federally incorporated, and our vision kind of became coalesced around a few core principles. We first started out addressing Jane Marsland's proposal about shared charitable platforms or charitable venture organizations. And we tried for 4 years to make ArtsPond into one of those platforms. We were unsuccessful. I didn't raise a single dollar for all the work that I was doing for that. So we shifted our focus in terms of objectives, but the core mandate and mission is the same. Looking at systemic precarity in the sector and how can we transform that into collective prosperity. So we're looking at these four key areas. Social inclusion. So how can artists be better empowered and arts workers be better empowered to take a leadership role in how we imagine our communities? And that they're included in systemic change kinds of conversations. Whether it's about economic development and economic equality, whether it's about spatial justice, so we have a project about gentrification, or if it's about digital issues and digital transformation opportunities. So social inclusion is the broad one. How can artists be much more empowered and appreciated and understood as potential leaders of systemic change conversations in these kind of three main areas? And we're using principles from social innovation, in particular collective impact. What collective impact does is brings cross-sectoral partners, say from not-for-profit and arts and business and small, medium-sized enterprises, impacted people, funders, government, to try to address a very complex issue over a long period of time. So climate change or homelessness are examples of very kind of common and worthwhile collective impact initiatives. So addressing very, very complex issues. So we're looking at digital transformation and gentrification as our two kind of collective impact major projects. But not just social innovation, artistic practice. Artists can be leaders of social innovation initiatives. So our actions and interventions responding to these core kind of guiding principles and belief systems. We started out whilst trying to become a shared charitable platform and asking questions of what that would look like. We called it Inflow or Afflux in French in 2014, and it hasn't gone anywhere yet, but it will link into where we are now in 2019, which I'll talk about in a second, hence the kind of the dotted line there. Our first major public project was Digital ASO. ASO stands for Art Service Organizations. And its approach was looking at digital research, literacy, alliance, and platform building as a big kind of 4 potential streams of activity to address digital transformation opportunities, needs, and gaps and barriers in the sector. So the first thing we did was actually an online digital survey that was national, prioritizing small creators and producers. It's called Managing Creativity in a Digital World. And it asked the question, actually, what would Artse and Hatch, the software tool, what would a new software tool that was open source look like, and what kinds of things would you want to have in it, and what are your challenges about using digital technology right now? So it was essentially prospecting about a future platform. And that launched in January of 2017, and is basically prep work for where we are now in terms of market research. We then did 2 symposiums, the Digital Art Services Symposium in 2017 in Toronto and Ottawa, funded by the Ontario Arts Council. Then the Digital Strategy Fund through myself as an individual and ArtsPond as a co-production agreement. We produced the 2nd edition in 2019 in March of this year. Instead of over 2.5 days, it was done over 6 days. We're prospecting and scoping a conversation nationally about what might a Digital Art Services Alliance look like, and whether there's a possibility for collaboration, again from a collective impact point of view, to collaboratively address systemic issues about digital opportunities and digital gaps in knowledge in the sector. So that's the alliance building, and I'll come down to our platform building in a second. But the second major project in the fall of 2017, funded by the Ontario Trillium Foundation, also through Canada Council for the Arts, through our partner Rosny Theatre, as well as the Government of Canada, is a collective impact effort looking at gentrification and displacement in the Greater Toronto to Hamilton region. So we started out with a bunch of convenings of community leaders to see if we could identify a theory of change that is both desirable and deliverable over a timeline that is representative of the needs of the community. We're publishing a 200-page literature review in about a month that's international, looking at arts responses and solutions to gentrification and displacement and spatial precarity in the sector. We just finished and are now analyzing the results of our first national survey on housing. There's another one coming up next month on workspaces for arts industry workers. So now leaping back down to 2019, we have this project, which in some ways actually roots back to the Inflow project. My assumption is that one of the barriers for actually creating a charitable venture platform is accountability to the government. They're worried about illustrating high artistic quality, high public impact, and high quality of direction and control over every single project that is involved in your platform. And they're not allowing new platforms to emerge under this kind of approach because they're worried about losing. You're not going to have the quality of direction and control. You're not going to demonstrate the high artistic quality. And the private benefit of artists gaining access to the platform will outweigh the public benefit. If we can build an information system that helps illustrate a lot of these things, demonstrates the high direction, quality, and control, the high artistic quality, and the high public benefit of every artist in the platform, of a charitable venture platform. The other important point of this is my business modeling suggests we need 110 projects per year to be financially viable in order to become a charitable venture organization. No way I'm going to have that many projects in 1 year. The most I've ever done is 10 in 1 year. I'm not going to do 110 without a really good information system. So if we can build an information system 10 years down the line, I hope we can demonstrate to Canada Revenue Agency on a special case that they may allow a few more of these kinds of platforms to emerge in the sector. So let's talk about some of the problems that I'm seeing in the sector in terms of digital transformation and technology from the small creator producer point of view. And how do we transfer into using digital technology? I think there are 5 major ones. And they root to the name Artse United, each one starting with an E. So engaging as arts, culture, heritage, tourism, and creative industry practitioners, particularly small ones, must come up to speed really quickly about very complex private and public data points to accurately tell, not only accurately, but in a concise way, in a clear way, and a compelling way, what their impact is, what their experience is, what their values and belief systems are, in order to bring people into their tent, in order to engage their publics, to deepen current relationships, and bring new people into the tent. We need to have these people, their artists, the producers, need to have a handle on these things in order to foster that inspired, engaging connection to their stakeholders. That's the first problem, both in ground relationships and in the cloud. Increasingly, artists are, okay, one-to-one in the room, but also through social media and other kind of cloud relationships. We're having to get a handle of how we share our data in both streams simultaneously, in a deep and compelling way. The second challenge is about literacy. How do I do that? What kinds of public and private data do I need to keep control of and share, and how do I share them? And how do I learn from them from my own point of view? How do I improve from my own data? I hear lots of people are fairly good at collecting their data, but they don't know what to do with it. How do I learn from it? How do I streamline and connect my data points from various projects or various tools that I'm using into an insightful kind of learning tool? So there's a lack of literacy in language for bringing their various disparate data points, private and public, from various streams into a way that they can assess and learn from them and improve their artistic practice, improve their business practices, and establish something that I call an impact practice, where they actually understand what kinds of questions they need to ask of themselves and of their community in order to improve, whether it's from an artistic point of view or from a business point of view, to become more impactful. And to share that kind of practice, that evaluation practice, with the artists that they work with, and ask those kinds of questions of their collaborators, of their administrators, if they have an administrative team. Most small creator producers, they're their own administrative staff, so they have to come up with, okay, multiple hats and sharing their perspectives. But if they have an administrative team, then sharing out what they learn with their audiences and our advocates, which often are funders and our ASOs that represent us and help support us. Not only over an individual project life cycle, but over their entire career. The idea of an impact practice is that you learn from one life cycle project and apply those lessons into your next project, and you're continuously improving the quality of your work, the impactfulness of the work, the directedness to your vision and mandate. You're feeling happy and fulfilled, and that you've expressed yourself, and that there's a greater connection with all of these stakeholders. So there's a lot around literacy and language. Is how can we use data to assist with these things? And actually, can data actually help? And in what ways can it? The next one is around excellence. For me, it is once we have wrangled our data points and we have an understanding of our data, there's not just what is our impact and illustrating our impact from that data, it's then applying those lessons to improve our entrepreneurial practices and our business practices, and to deepen our, so I've kind of talked about this a little bit, deepen our insight and learning for our future projects, not just for an accountability purpose. Okay, we increased our audience by 10% from my last project, but why? And what was the change story, the experience that happened with those audiences? and using data and evaluation tools and are having better excellence and efficiency in our data management tools and our data practices to be able to illustrate and tell those change stories over time. And not just quantitative, so I gave an example of bums and seats, that's very quantitative. There's, I think, an urgency or an interest in how can we capture our qualitative or intrinsic value stories? And can we use information systems to help us identify those? Is another problem, which I think if my theory of change and ArtSpawn's theory of change is that if we can better understand not just qualitative evaluation or just quantitative, sorry, but also qualitative, there is the possibility to bring more people to our tent or better understand what's working for us and not, and why. Enterprising. The complexity of the data is providing us opportunities to better understand our practices and perhaps grow in new ways, and extend from just ground relationships to cloud relationships. But as there are more and more platforms, and now data has been recently valued as more important and worth more than both gold and oil, it is the most valuable resource in the world. There are challenges about our ownership of that data. Related to ownership and complex data ownership is about our evolving artistic practice. Increasingly, our artistic practice, artists are not just working in one discipline. I studied music, but I actually like poetry and visual art and theater. Our tools that we're building and our practices about understanding our data are very much rooted in single disciplines, in my experience. And we don't have a very deep understanding of what are the needs in terms of evaluation, in terms of arts management, of capturing data and sharing data across multiple disciplines within a single artistic project or a single artistic career. So there's problems of dimensionality. So a single artist is not just capturing now data points about their visual arts career, they're capturing and needing to manage and share data points about their poetry, or about their music, or about their creative writing. And our information systems that we are building historically are discipline specific. There's lots of tools out there for visual artists or art galleries. There's nothing out there that is integrated that works for a visual artist and a poet, or a composer and a dancer. There's very few that are working in disciplines. In terms of data management and understanding your impact and expressing and sharing your impact with your stakeholders, because they're so discipline specific. And we start getting into issues of project management and financial management and logistics, it's even worse. Because the visual arts practice is so different from a performing arts practice. So there are very specific needs in terms of project management for data for a visual artist versus a performing artist. And we've run across that in our public consultations already, is a visual artist maybe doesn't understand what producing means, whereas sharing means something to them. Whereas producing is a very meaningful word for a lot of performing artists, and there's all kinds of wonderful content and connection to that word. Okay? Then there's the issue of discoverability. Once we have a sense of our data and we're able to kind of understand the complexity and the dimensionality of it and share it out, how do we get that data discoverable to the people that we want in our tent that aren't currently connected? And so the embedded solutions that are available here in the sector so far are not meeting the needs, the entrepreneurial needs of small creators and producers. In terms of the complexity of the artistic practice, there's other issues like affordability is a big one. Many tools are way too expensive if they are kind of fairly robust, or they're too simple. If they're free, but they're too simple and they're not actually arts-based at all. The final one I've kind of mentioned is evolving. So the artistic practice is evolving, and one artist might start in a visual arts career and end up being a performing artist at the end of their career. Ideally, an information system can evolve and grow with that evolving artistic practice and evolving needs in terms of data management. But what I want to add here, and this is coming towards where Artse is going, or our proposal, is that there is a real need for solutions that can help empower and enable greater investment in the sector by better telling our stories from a quantitative and qualitative point of view, by assisting in the evaluative process of individual artists and then using the information system to better tell a more concise, clear, and compelling impact story that will welcome new audiences, new donors into their tent. And that will help illustrate that evolving journey that artist is undertaking over time. I think we need something like that to help the industry long term. So this is an old map. It's more than 2 years old. I have not added to it since the launch of the Digital Strategy Fund. There is some Digital Strategy Fund projects in here, like Culture Creates and Capicoa, both have Digital Strategy Fund projects. But on the left side, there is examples of organizations that I've been aware of 2 years ago that they're not necessarily all arts organizations, but they're doing digital platform building. And so I'm just generally calling them DASOs, or digital art service organizations, that are using digital technology or digital values and principles and alliance building and research and so on to see how we can support the sector using digital principles. So there's quite a few here over in Canada and then international. So like an example, Neon is not an arts organization. It's a CRM, a client relationship management tool. It's meant for every industry, but they've actually done quite a bit of outreach in their design thinking and in their marketing and in their platform building to address the needs of the arts community. It's not perfect, but they've done some outreach, so I would include them here. In terms of analytics, Qualia is a platform for qualitative assessment of the arts, primarily for festivals, that was funded through the equivalent of Canada's Digital Strategy Fund at the Arts Council of England about 5 to 7 years ago. Data Arts and CADAC are well known in terms of US and Canada operating stream organizations or larger organizations reporting their impacts, quantitative primarily, to funders. Platform co-ops is more in the direction where ArtsFund is trying to go. We'll talk more about what an actual platform co-op is, but basically what it is the idea of using a cooperative principle or sharing using a digital tool, so that the digital tool is owned by the community or the data that's in the tool is owned by the community. That's the basics of it, and I'll let Stephanie talk more about it later. And there are a couple in Canada. Culture Creates is trying to create a data cooperative around their platform for kind of audience discoverability of arts data. Artse United is a co-op for stock photography artists based in Victoria, and it's international. They represent several thousand stock photography artists from around the world. And they're the first innovator in the platform co-op space in the art sector in the world. And they've been they've had a lot of visibility. Lots of research has been done on their work. Resonate is based in the US. They're new, they're kind of like us. They're a little bit further along, but they are trying to create an alternative cooperative space for live streaming of music, a dissemination platform for musicians. So the solution that we're proposing with the Digital Strategy Fund from Canada Council is two-pronged. There's the software building on one side, and the name for that tentatively right now is called Hatch Open. And that's an open source software platform providing the essentials of arts management, the arts management needs of small creators and producers. And I'm going to go into more detail in a minute, but that's the basics. Artse United then is the idea of if there are a community of artists using this open source software platform, what can we do collectively by creating a community of those users? And the proposal to begin with is to share data. To share the data that's in the platform in a way and to opt in. So you can only use the software, hatch open, if that's your preference. It'll be free, anyone can use it. If you want to be part of a greater community, we're suggesting or looking at the idea of creating a co-op. You share your data, whatever data you want to share. You don't have to share everything. You can share a few things and see what there is in the power of collective data and what can be done with that. And that the focus is that our platform building is by artists, by arts workers, for the arts. Too often platform building is they come up with the solution and then users find a way to fit themselves into it. So there's lots of project management software solutions, there's lots of financial management solutions out there built by all kinds of organizations, and artists we're just trying to find a way to fit in. Our design thinking is asking the community what you want, what you need, how do you work, and the solution is meant to respond to that. So a value proposition is a chain here of ripple effects, and that there's 4 kinds of streams of solutions built on it. So project management, which includes financial management, CRM or client or constituency relationship management, team collaboration and asset management, and business intelligence or just learning. So we started out asking, what would happen if an information system can help artists spend more time in the studio and less on administration? And what information system is needed to make that happen? This is the kind of the questions we're asking in terms of the value proposition. And this presentation will be downloadable on the website for those that want to have access to it after. Okay? Well, less time in this by administration on artists means they have more time in the studio to develop a sense of what their creative practice is, which they then can share with others and express their story, their values, their belief system, their creative essence in a more clear, concise, and compelling way. So then they have improved internal awareness of their core artistic vision and potential. They can then, the producers or the arts managers or their producer hat, if they're the same person, they can then communicate in a more compelling way through their marketing that artistic vitality to others because they understand it better themselves. And so a project management system will allow that to happen, assuming it allows them to become more efficient and more effective in their day-to-day administrative activities. The next step is the constituency relationship management, building on this enhanced marketing communications. Okay, if we're telling our story and our values in a more compelling way, there's going to be more demand for people to talk to us and give to us and engage with us. So we need a CRM solution of some kind, which will ultimately, hopefully, increase our earned and private sector revenues through a marketing component and a fundraising component. That's what CRM is, for those that don't know what it is. It's basically fundraising and marketing together, audience management, ticketing, ticket sales, tax receipts, and so on, which will ultimately end in enhanced financial sustainability of the arts. Asset and team collaboration management is basically collaborating with others in the community within your own team. If you now have a larger team, you're no longer an individual artist. You're now, because of your financial capacity, you're bringing more people into your tent to work with. You need a team collaboration system, and you have more content that you've been creating that you want to share out. I call them cultural assets. So whether it's videos or, one second, Frederick. Whether it's videos or images that you either just want to share or you want to sell. You need something to help you manage that. Question, Frederick.
So some of the assets that you described may require some security, at least some tracking, especially if it's actual creative content for which there is IP. However, some of the assets that you describe, like people, organizations, are actually assets that you would want to be public. And easily findable, linkable.
Yes.
So I just want to flag this because security can sometimes get in the way of collaboration.
Yes, absolutely, and we feel that to address in any platform that we build. And so security is a big issue, yeah. But once we have, more quality time devoted to administration is the ideal end result of that, with the improved insights and decision-making that can come as a result of everything that we have up above, and increased collaboration, risk-taking, and so on. And the end result is a more inspired, engaged society by using business intelligence to illustrate our impacts and hopefully improve public policy as a result, because we have the data to illustrate what's happening in the sector. So that is the big picture of what we're trying to get towards in terms of the software. What we actually have funding to build is not all of that. Very small scale. We're starting out basically at opposite ends with project management and business intelligence. And we'll gradually fill in, so at opposite ends of the chain and working into the middle of the chain over time. So we have financial management and, can everyone hear me okay? I'm just gonna talk. Financial management and project management as phase 1 and 2, which is lasting until September of 2020. And then a little bit of business intelligence. And I'm gonna get into more detail what these things actually are. I'm just gonna talk about, what are the key modules that we're developing, at what phase, and then I'll talk about what the specific modules are. Focused on small creators and producers with the visual arts, performing arts, and disability arts as the initial focus. So this is until September 2020. And that the co-op, which I'll get into in a minute, is about hopefully helping with shared learning. Collecting data for the purpose of shared learning. Okay. Phase 3 and 4 is looking at marketing and fundraising, and phase 1 and 2, financial management, project management, business intelligence will continue with media arts, community arts, indigenous arts, and cultural heritage. We'll start adding functionality and project management and these elements in this community, but also start working on the beginning prototypes of marketing and fundraising for these communities, and start to think about these. And then 5 and 6 is asset management and team management for basically everyone else. And so marketing and communications will continue into phase 5 and 6, introducing these communities. So it's like a 10-year, 10, 12-year project. About $30 million is what's needed, with the co-op moving gradually from shared learning to shared resources to shared networks. So the co-op itself, there's so many opportunities of what the co-op or what a shared structure. It may not end up being a co-op. It's a proposed idea that it becomes a co-op structure. There's so many things that once we put artists using a similar tool and producers using a similar tool, there's so many things that could come out of that is collective. And I put a few examples here. So first of all, we would have consumers as well as workers. So the workers are the artists and the managers and the agents and ASOs, probably also technologists that are putting data or using the open source software and putting data into it. And they'll have their own private data, but then they may decide to share some of that content into a cooperative structure. So a worker, for example, in blue here, a producer, in the information system, they have a contract. So they have the data about a contract. It's all of the artists for a single project. So maybe there's 15 contracts that they have in the information system. What time do they start? What time do they end? What is their fee? What is their title? And so on. Their address. It's sitting in the information system. An ASO, so we'll move it over here. An ASO like Equity or Pact might want that data to get put automatically into their contracting system. So a user of Artse or Hatch Open, if we can come up with a community-minded approach to this, put in your data to Artse and it'll automatically port into anyone else that needs a contract and it'll generate the contracts for you. That's just one example of what a collaborative approach to this could be. I'm not saying it's going to be that. I'm saying that's what it could be. Another example, an artist creates some cultural products, or what I was calling asset management. So you have a video of your show. You have a rehearsal video and you have your final video. And you want to share that with various stakeholders. You may want to share that actually back to other workers in the platform, but more likely you're going to want to share that to your publics, to maybe other ASOs that want to demonstrate the quality of the artistic discipline. So they're going to be consumers. The media, if you're disseminating it to Netflix, for example, as a media dissemination platform, they would need to be a member of the platform to get access to your content. Government might want access to your cultural products. Funders, advocates, might want access to those. A lot of people might want access to the cultural products. So actually, asset dissemination, I think, is the best long-term bet for what a collaborative solution, a co-op could look like. But we need the basic day-to-day management information system first before we can open that minefield. But when I'm thinking long-term, that's one of the best opportunities. One more example, a manager has a budget, planned and actual. They may want to share the planned, I didn't put an arrow back, but they may want to share the planned budget back with their, say, their agent and the other artists, but they want to share the actual budget to a funder. Okay? So we have consumers and workers. So workers are contributing content, consumers are accessing that content or that data. So we have kind of data. I've just given a few examples, like contracts and budgets. Those are kind of quantitative things. But there could be very qualitative data points also, like how have I changed as an artist over my 20-year career? Assuming this platform still exists in 20 years, there could be a lot of insight and learning and sharing through this data evaluation that someone might want to have access to. A donor, an ASO, a funder, another artist. So there is, down here we have insight. So there could be strategic analysis, or they might want to get access to your visualization dashboards, looking at planned and actual spending over a 5-year timeline. How much did you plan to spend and make, and how much did you actually? Someone might want to buy that from you, or you might decide to just give it to them for free, but they would you would have control over that, and only members of the co-op could have access to that. Decision making is another one. Lots of insight opportunities here. The infrastructure side, okay, is the open source code, and it will need to eventually be on a computer somewhere, hosted. So that could be, just the hosting could be part of the co-op. And we'll need to buy server farms if we have thousands of users or have lots of servers. And we could share that server capacity to others at a reduced cost. If we, like SOCAN has something called a data lake, which is literally thousands of individual servers. And they have a cost, the cost of that per server is much less. So if we end up needing a large server capacity to support all of our users, we could lend that out or share that access to other people developing software that need shared servers in a public realm, or users that want to buy storage off of the platform at a very reduced rate. That could happen. So digital hardware and digital knowledge. So we're going to be hiring eventually, I hope, machine learning and AI and IT staff. We need them for our platform long term, but we probably don't need them full time. They're part of a co-op. All co-op members could access that digital knowledge, those digital experts, through the platform at a reduced rate. And then we can retain that knowledge in the community and not lose them. If we can't employ them full time, maybe by sharing with other members in the co-op, 1 day a week or 2 days a week, we can retain that knowledge in the art sector and not lose them to another industry. Okay, so what we're actually building is quickly in phase 1 and 2 is a core software solution that's looking at private data management. So we need to build a core. So who are you and what are your preferences for how the software works, how you're going to share data, how it looks like. I want the interface to look black. I want it to look white. I want that button to look red, blue, etc. All that kind of core infrastructure that will change how the overall software works. Then we're working on financial management and project management and some visualization dashboards. So the project manager, we're trying to figure out what are the quick wins that we can deliver, like 5 things that we can deliver in like 6 months that the sector really needs and wants and will promote buy-in quickly. Can you see the longer term vision will be beneficial, but we still need something that we need now, like right now, that is cheap and affordable, but also desirable. And we're trying to figure that out. The theory right now is we need some accounts receivable, accounts payable, invoicing templates, scanning of receipts, and some budget templates. So your accounts receivable and accounts payable tied to your budget and reporting and visualizing out what those budgets look like from a planned and unlimited number of revised budgets, and then your actual. And those budgets you can scan in using as PDFs, as images, as Word documents, as Excel documents, and the platform will automatically recognize artistic director, venue rental, and it will map to our financial account system. You can also have your own custom financial account system, chart of accounts, and it will map automatically to the Canada Revenue Agency T1 General. If you're an arts organization, to CADAC, Canadian Arts Data, and other kinds of reporting platforms in the long run. And then it'll connect to QuickBooks and other kinds of accounting systems. And then the project management is the basics of who you are as an artist and who you're collaborating with and what your various artistic activities are and your projects. What's the vision statement, core images, just basic information about it, and timelines of what you've been doing and when. So we can generate out some CVs in various templates, and we're thinking time tracking as something that's, yeah, there's a lot of time tracking applications, but as something that we can build quickly that might be of use in the short term. Time tracking is something we're looking at in terms of project management, but there's lots more that can go in there. We're focusing on financial management right now. We haven't got to the project management yet. The visualization is a private dashboard, mostly likely of the financials. And we're going to experiment with an app on your phone that asks 5 or 10 templated questions that we recommend. And you can add 5 to 10 of your own custom questions. It's a little survey tool, basically. And you can graph it using words or images. There's a variety of ways to graph the results. Questions about your artistic practice and how you're feeling about your artistic practice. And that will ultimately map into CADAC reporting in a more comprehensive way. So it's not just bums and seats, but it's the feeling and the story around that. So we're going to experiment with what kinds of qualitative questions are useful to the sector. And you can decide when you put your custom questions into the tool, you can decide, no, that question is only for me. I don't want anyone else to see it. Or no, I'm willing to share that question with any other users, and they can decide whether they like that question or not. The idea is we can gradually crowdsource the best kinds of most impactful questions and research from a qualitative point of view. The public data then, and this is just a theory, we don't know if people want to do it or not, is to opt in to share aspects of your data to a public visualization that's aggregated and anonymous, to look at what's happening in the overall sector. Kind of like what CADAC does, but for individual artists. And to benchmark against others in terms of your artistic practice and how things are going. But it's really uncertain about that. As we don't have money to really host the software in the long run, in the short run, the software hosting is going to be on your computer. The software and the data is stored locally on your computer. And once we figure out the long-term viability of our platform, we'll figure out whether we're hosting data on a public server and providing hosting services for the software. But in the immediate short term, the software is going to be on your local computer, and you're going to have to figure out, you'll have to have the technical skills to do that. Okay? Just some examples of what a dashboard might look like. These are related to my own thinkings about project management and the life cycle of artistic practices. It's not necessarily what it will be, but just as an inspiration point. Okay? So I summarize projects into 4 life cycle stages: initiate, incubate, activate, and I iterate. And so the idea here is that once you put in all your projects and the various stages that they're in, there could be a graph for each project. So here you would click on this and you would have, you would click on, say, strategic planning, and you would see your strategic plans and any information that you connected to the topic of strategic planning in terms of data. Incubation, research, and final creation, and so on. So you would be able to click on to get access to your data, but it would also be like a timeline of the project and the various activities when they happen. There's no dates on this visualization, but there could be dates on the visualization to give you a summary. So that's an individual project lifecycle. Then there's like your career. So this is my career as in the arts. What a visualization summary of your CV might look like, and then you could click in any element for the details. Just an example. And in the inside is the connection points, the inspiration points, the leading. So being a creator helped me become a producer and a designer and a collaborator. They're just showing the connection points. So we're hoping that the information system will have things like that to show connections and reliances and dependencies upon, in the example of a project, if this was not just your life cycle activities, but if this was individual projects over these number of years, you could show the reliances or how one project was inspired by another. And you could click on this line to find out what is the connection? Is it the artist is the same, or it was a remount, or just the idea? Yeah. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the 4 streams quickly, and then we're going to have some presentations from the consultants about the streams. So there are 4 streams: innovation, research, structural development, public engagement, and technical development. So just really quickly, innovation research is basically, we're building, the vision for this is very ambitious. It's very complicated, very expensive, and to be responsive, we need to be, like Frederic, you were just mentioning about the changing nature of Google on a daily basis. If we're going to build something that is responsive to the community and interoperable or connects seamlessly to other technology as it's also developing and developing, we need to have an understanding of the nature of the technology in the industry now and in the future. So there's issues about the technology and our sustainability long term. Domain ontology, or how do we structure the metadata that we're capturing for individual artists? There's good metadata structures out there for various aspects, like what goes into an MP3, or a description of arts event. The ontology or the data structure of that is fairly well understood. The qualitative assessment of a small creator producer's entire life cycle, how do we structure that in a data, is not well understood. So there's going to be issues about how we create an information system that is then understandable and accessible by other technology systems in a clear and concise way. We need to do a lot of research in that area. Interoperability I talked about. And in order to be customizable and responsive to every individual artist, our theory is we need to be using AI and machine learning, artificial intelligence and machine learning, to make it as customizable and adaptable in the future. This is not only expensive, but complex. And how are we going to address issues of governance, of AI, in the future in our platform is something we need to look at. Public engagement is this work. We did 12 focus groups in the summer in the visual arts, performing arts, and disability arts, 4 each, as well as these public consultations in Toronto, Ottawa, and Sudbury. And we're going to be publishing on hopefully a fairly regular basis, white papers, blog articles, and we're going to be doing online webinars throughout the fall and into the new year, sharing our learning and barriers, experiences of barriers through this project over time. Then structural scoping is looking at, is a co-op the right way to go for taking the opportunity of a community sharing a digital tool and building a community out of that? Is a co-op the right structure for it? Is a shared structure needed and wanted? And if it's not a co-op, what might it look like? So we're working with Stephanie Guico on that. We're working with a lawyer, Andreas Kalogiannides, on issues of intellectual property and what kinds of terms of agreements do we need for our platform. And qualitative assessment of the arts is a relatively new field. So we're working with, and I'll talk about him, we're working with Kelly Hill from Hill Strategies Research on that. Then the technical prototyping is just the software building. So the back-end development after we've done these design thinking workshops, and then the front-end and UI/UX development. Is there anything you need clarification on from what I've just shared? Frederic.
So you were talking about private versus public data in Artse, suggesting that it will be up to the participants or users to opt in to make their data public. Have you, and I presume you did, but did you start identify what would be the pros and cons? What would be the value added that might motivate people to make their data public versus any fears or obstacles that they might have? How far are you in this kind of research?
The design thinking workshops that we've been doing, these consultations, is trying to get at where the community is at that. We haven't gone too far in terms of our own thinking. Yes, we have thought about it, but I don't think we have created an itemized list that captures everything that we're thinking about just yet. I think some of the assumptions or thoughts maybe come out in this, in terms of what it could be. But in our consultation workshops yesterday, in each of the days, we asked about public and private and individual and collective perspectives from using an information system. And there are a lot of concerns about anything going public and losing control over it, or is there any benefit at all of making it public? And there's concerns about whether there's money involved. And if so, where's that money coming from and what's it being used for? So I think we're just at the beginning stages of asking whether there is value in that, and if so, what it looks like.
Many of the use cases that you provided as examples with this slide will require a fair deal of data to be open rather than private.
Yes, if there isn't a collective community around it, like just strategic analysis, public benchmarking, if there isn't a body of data there, then it won't be very useful. Yeah. Thank you. Margaret, Alana, going to talk about the design thinking perspective.
My name is Margaret. I'm the design think lead for Artse United. And just a very quick introduction. What is design thinking? In a nutshell, it's basically a research process. So there are methods, approaches for data collection, analysis, with the ultimate objective of coming with design recommendations. Not for the color of the walls that's going to go up, but for things like what should the system be, what are the interests of the stakeholders, so how do we support those kinds of things that could be software. And in this case, we're applying to the design of software. So one of the big pieces in the process is coming up with good questions. So we elicit the most interesting responses that can inform design decisions. Be a part of the prototyping user testing phase before the software gets too advanced in its development to validate some of the assumptions we've made. And actually, as you might be, one of the questions you might be asking as well, obviously there's been a lot of thinking about the design of this software, so why are we still doing design thinking? A lot of the work is really going through the research process to validate a lot of the assumptions that's gone into coming up with those design recommendations. And it's an iterative process going on and going on. One of the things about my approach to applying design thinking in this case is that there's an assumption that technology is not value neutral, meaning that we're coming in not with a preconceived notion of these are the technologies, these are the approaches, and this is the user experience that we're going to build, but starting from the bottom up and really understanding, okay, well, how are the users experiencing their day-to-day realities of the current software? What do they want it to do for them? And then from there decide what are the technologies, what are the design user experiences we're going to create. So we're working out from that perspective. On a practical level, there were focus groups, as Jessa mentioned, this summer held 2-hour ones asking about a variety of questions, and I'll share 3 of the most interesting insights that you might find of interest. So we asked about people's experiences in their digital lives managing the artistic practices as producers, small organizations. And 3 common areas were discussed across the board. So on the topic of email, it was very common for people to identify email as a way to achieve a quick win. You send an email, you feel you've got something done, and it feels really great. So that's from the perspective of people sending emails and being all productive all day. On the receiving end, people feel like there were disruptions. And they were interrupting the flow, and they were overwhelming, and it was decreasing sort of the work satisfaction. And one of the most common reasons for sending out emails was just in case I get hit by a bus. I want everyone to have a copy of what I just did, so I'm just going to CC everybody on my list. So these are the kinds of, we were capturing the kinds of thinking and behaviors of people around email. So that was interesting. And all of these, there's going to be a theme to all of these 3, and you can think about it as I'm going through them. The second one was social media. Everyone complained that it was impossible to keep up with the rate of content creation and keeping up with the changes of these platforms, that they change the rules, the formats of things, and figuring things out. But when we asked them, okay, well, how effective is this social media activity? Most of them were not really sure. I mean, they were happy perhaps with the engagement levels and the likes and things like that. But when asked, well, how do you know how much of this engagement is actually meaningful? So for someone, that could be how many people actually showed up, how many new people I was introduced to, how many existing patrons actually appreciated or were informed otherwise. They really could not say. It was just a feeling, and they were just crossing their fingers hoping that it was working. So that was a huge dichotomy in terms of the amount of effort and sort of occupation social media had on people's minds versus the actual thing they were getting back that's important to them. So there was a gap in that. Google Drive Dropbox. Everyone says that, it's great that we have these free tools, we just put things on there and it's stored. But when we dug deeper into it, people were not satisfied with their ability to work with what was there. They could access it, they could get the files that they wanted to, but the purpose of sort of retrieving and understanding and reviewing, it was near impossible to do that. So they feel like they've done the job of digitally archiving, basically hoarding all of the digital files somewhere, knowing that hopefully it's safe and the cloud servers that it's on is not going to crash. But when they thought deeply about it, it was no more or less useful than just having not kept the files to begin with. They weren't able to use it effectively. So when we analyze all these things, a thought came up in terms of a question we should be asking from a design perspective when we're designing Artse United's user experience. What are the tools we're using to help us, the productive tools we're using to help us, are actually counterproductive by design? So yes, we're acquiring these tools and they're supposed to help us, but in reality, that's not the case. And then the design question becomes, well, okay, so how would you design it differently? So now that we've been collecting a ton of data through the focus groups, this recent tour, our next step is really analyzing the data, synthesizing it, and generating those design recommendations I mentioned earlier. And for now, this is an example of the types of questions we'll be asking. So on the one side, what are the productive and effective digital practices we have figured out? This really emerged throughout this tour, where there's always a gem from someone in the group that says, I've actually really figured out this great way to be productive and save time using my tools this way, and everyone else in the group picks up the pen and starts taking notes and says, I really gotta start doing that. So I think individually, we have figured some things out, but we're not sharing collectively to benefit everyone else. So how do we do that? How do we propagate that kind of practice through the tools we're using every day? Can we design that kind of behavior right into the user experience of the software? I have some ideas. It's an interesting approach, and I think that's an interesting angle, and we will see in this next step what we come up with. But this is the design process, and that's my role in Artse.
Thanks, Margaret.
Hi there, my name is Amine Al, and I am the technical lead at Artse. My role is to design, build, and oversee the development process of Hatch Open. In this succinct and high-level presentation, I would like to share with you some of my thought process and analysis that went into the first phase of this project. I believe that you will find this presentation beneficial if you're thinking of or are currently building a digital solution in some form. And at the end of this presentation, I will share with you a little nugget that will help you avoid many rookie pitfalls in any software application development. In fact, you may even look like a superhero. Anyways, so the core objective we started with is to unify the siloed and segregated efforts of art organizations and individual creators into one amalgamating interface to centralize anonymized, and I say anonymized, data points to help each organization, group, and individual benchmark themselves not only against similar entities, but also the whole sector at large. So that's a mouthful. That is an ambitious vision that requires a technologist to do quite a bit of research and deep domain understanding in order to be able to re-articulate the vision into binary solutions that are quite mechanical in their nature. One of the major tasks to start with is defining challenges that lay ahead in regards to the business process. For Hatch Open, we have categorized them in three major points. The first one is there is a lack of data coherence between ad hoc groups, between organizations, and also across disciplines and communities. The second point is there is a lack of domain-specific data structure that the sector adheres to. As a side note, to my knowledge, Capacoa is tackling this issue within the performing arts, but I digress. And the last one is user buy-in. This one really applies to any software application, whether it's a new one or an updated one, and it's usually challenging because it's time consuming and there's usually limited resources for this part. For the arts organization specifically, there is a training and onboarding limitation that is usually due to a high churn ratio. Transitioning from existing business processes to the new solution to be implemented could or would be challenging because of the reasons in this slide. Having said that, Hatch Open has to have low onboarding friction, has to be easy to use, and requires low to no transitional costs. Now, we will keep that in mind and dig a little bit deeper into the technology and the system requirements that have short and medium-term business implications. These requirements are scalability, visibility, maintainability, and extensibility. First, scalability. This is my favorite overused and most often misused buzzword. This is essentially how should the underlying system architecture be designed in order to handle a surge in system usage. The surge could be a one-time spike or it could be due to the business growth. The second one is extensibility. The web application, because it's essentially based on web technologies, must be modular and flexible to be able to incorporate any new feature that the business decides. The implementations of these new business units must be segregated from the core and other business modules, yet has to remain fully compatible. And I will elaborate on this one more when we talk about the system modeling. The third one is visibility. Because of the intangible nature of software systems and the size of the new infrastructure that Hatch Open is going to be undertaking, it is important to keep all new development processes visible by providing full documentation for each module and its integration with the core system. that would be detailing, for example, module inputs, the input format, and the input minimum requirements, independent storage persistencies, libraries and API dependencies, and also the module and output formats. Now, in real estate, they talk about location, location, location. When it comes to software, it's really documentation, documentation, documentation. The last one is maintainability. If you look at this slide as a compass, you will notice that I put it in the southern position. And the reason why I did that is because it's the most overlooked cause of business failures. If your maintenance cost is so high and unmanageable, it will bring your business down. That's why reducing complexity is extremely important in order to keep the maintainability costs as low as possible. And to achieve that, we need to avoid undocumented feature deployments, poor corrective code implementations, and excessive dead code. In other words, technical debt. If your system has a lot of technical debt, it will bankrupt. So how do we achieve this? We achieve this by designing a system model that is multi-tiered. We will have a core system, and that's where you have your main database, your main code, and then a third-party API controller that communicates with third-party services. For example, if we're dealing with financial tools, we're going to be communicating with QuickBooks with one single button. We'll be able to send transactional emails to the users with a single button. And you will also have your module controller. So this element here, this very specific component, will allow us to communicate in a very independent way with every module, which is also a feature or a service that the system has. Now, each module is running independently as a microservice on its own and communicating independently with the core system. This allows us to implement bug fixes, improvements, and updates to every module or any module without having any direct effect on the core system as a whole. If you recall from the second slide, I mentioned that one of Hatch's business requirement is low transition cost. This system model designed in this slide allows us to do exactly that by allowing existing systems that an organization is using to interface with the core through an API. And slowly but surely, an organization will eventually transition to using the full features of Hatch. And that essentially summarizes at a very high level how Hatch will come together. And I know you have a question right now, and that is, where is my nugget? Well, here it is. Technology solutions amplify both efficient and inefficient business processes equally. Technology is not a solution to bad business processes. If you have a well-aligned and streamlined business process and you add a well-designed digital solution to it, you create value. The opposite couldn't be more true. And that's my little nugget. If you want to engage in conversation about this project or perhaps would love more nuggets, get in touch with Jessa, or you can reach me at tech@artse.ca.
The next stream of activity is in Insight with Coach Kelly Hill of Hill Strategies Research, helping us on evaluation and impact practice strategies. What's happening with this consultant and others is that we have a small pool of money and we're thinking, identifying what are the gaps, what do we know and what don't we know about evaluation practices. From a qualitative point of view is where most of our resources are going, to figure out what the cost is going to be to find the answers in the near future. So we're doing some scoping, basically, of the literature and our community knowledge about evaluation practices. And Kelly has some questions that he wants us to think about. What does an impact practice or an evaluation practice mean and look like to you? How do you think, what do you think evaluation is actually used for and for whom? Is important to me also. So how do you then talk about your family about the importance of what you do is one way to get at what is evaluation. At the end of the day, in the entire day in your studio, what do you share? What do you talk about to your friends and family? If you already evaluate your artistic practices, how do you do so, and what tools or practices or questions are you asking or using? What data have you used to show the importance of what you do? And data is meant to be, it's an awkward word, but it's meant to encompass everything. What questions are you asking? What images are you sharing? What stories are you telling? And have you ever actually tried to capture the qualitative essence of what you do? And if so, how are you doing that? And basically, what impacts do you think your artistic activities have on an intrinsic level? Working with Andreas Kalogiannides, he's with a new law firm. He was on his own for a while. He's now with Aura LLP. And like Kelly, who has a pool of money to look at what are the gaps and how might we need to work in the future to address those gaps about evaluation and impact practices. Andreas is looking at legal issues, both in the open source software and in the cooperative. What agreements do we need to have, and how do they get implemented, and which is critical in the next 6 months, which can wait? And what's the budget and the plan for that long term? My theory is about $300,000 in legal costs. And now I'd like to turn the mic over to Stephanie Guico to talk about the co-op considerations.
We landed on the co-op form because it intersects so well with the collective mindset of the project and the community orientation of the project. It is also only a hunch at this point. We don't assume that co-op or co-op business structure is palatable for everyone or what everyone might want. So we've been going around during the consultations, for one thing, demystifying very much what a co-op is, and then asking people at the source of what a co-op is, right, around doing together, sharing, coming to decisions together, and so on, what their experiences had been, and what they think it could look like in this context and under what conditions. To determine if this is indeed going to be a co-op, or if it's going to be something else. So bear in mind that all of this is the big old frame that this is a hunch. So what is a co-op? A co-op is a business that is jointly owned and democratically controlled by the people whom it serves. Said in a different way, when a group of individuals have a common problem that they anticipate being able to solve through a business, which is revenue generating and therefore financially sustainable, they might register and operate a cooperative. And yeah, as I just alluded to, the business itself is meant to meet a common economic, social, or cultural need of current and future owners. So we're not only in it for the interests of ourselves, we're also thinking of the generations ahead who might also benefit from that business. Around the world, co-ops operate around 7 principles and a number of values, some of which were addressed yesterday, but these are the 7 co-op principles here, which, to a slip of the tongue, which someone, I think it was Margaret, used yesterday, end up having the intention of encoding certain inalienable approaches that differentiate co-ops from private businesses. First being that membership, so aka ownership, is open and voluntary. No one can be forced into joining a co-op. Similarly, if you want to leave, you want to leave, and that is okay. The members and therefore owners control the business democratically via vote. One voice, one vote. The members are meant to participate economically, which means that when you become an owner, you pay in a share and commit to doing business, albeit not exclusively, right, with the cooperative for the purposes it is meant to serve you for. Co-ops are autonomous and independent. They don't defer to or don't answer to other structures outside themselves, with, of course, the exception of government and local laws. And they have the purpose and the responsibility of educating, informing, and training their members. To the case in front of us, that connects most obviously in 2 ways. One, educating, informing, and training on what in the world it means to own a business, mostly when the thing that you're transacting or coming together for is data. And to another point related to data, educating around the meaning of governing data together and perhaps transacting in it, right? Selling it. And concern for community and inter-cooperation are meant to anchor the co-op in an awareness that it is not a silo. It doesn't exist in a little world of its own. It is meant to do good for the community it is a part of, and it is also meant to cooperate with other cooperatives when it's appropriate to do so. Jessa alluded to platform co-ops a little earlier. Keeping it simple and then opening to clarifying questions later on. So we've demystified a little bit what a co-op is. A platform, on the other end, is, in its simplest form, a virtual business that supports people by disintermediating, or being the mediator between people who need something and people who have the thing that is needed. Ben simple, pas compliqué. I need a ride, you have a car, we are Uber. Now, what a platform co-op is, platform that is owned collectively by the people who need the service and use the service. So what if Uber was owned by drivers and users? And if you're curious about that, there is actually a startup in Montreal called Ava Co-op that is trying to do exactly that. Ouais, ça se passe cool. And they're like 23. I was on the phone with them yesterday. When I was in the back there, I was on the phone with them. They're like trying to figure out how to graduate their undergrad while running a platform co-op. It's quite a thing. All this to say, in our case, we're still at a point where we're trying to figure out, indeed, who wants to be served by this thing we're creating? Because it's a bit of a risk to try and be everything to everyone and assume that everyone owns the thing, because you spend a lot of time negotiating self-interest, and where the self-interest overlap to be a real collective business. Now, of course, membership is one thing we're asking ourselves. We're also very aware that co-ops are awesome, but the human element makes everything in life complicated. So we are also aware that, things like democracy is hard, ownership and startups take time. But all this being said, if we're designing, or if the design is made by the artists for the artists, you'll end up with a product and services that are right for you. So informing our process throughout is this awareness of yes, we want the artists to be involved, but at the same time, from that education and information perspective I was talking about, being very upfront and bringing the conversation to a point where it's but do you realize what you're getting yourself into, possibly? And how do we make sure that the complexities and the burdensome nature of ownership can be done in a way that is sufficient and in tune with your reality, so that it's just not burdensome, and rather light and just enough. So we're, looking at robust consultations with you all to make sure that people are consenting to be involved in something that they can actually commit to. So I am with the project through phase 1. So we asked ourselves realistic questions through December, many of which you've contributed to for those who were part of the consultations. The questions we're asking ourselves, bigger picture, is from what we hear in consultation, what do people want to own and control and how? What will make it worthwhile in the long run for them? How is it possible now, legally and financially? And just so you know, these are not questions, the legal and financial aspect that we're asking you necessarily. This is side research. The law is the law. We're not gonna. And what structure does it all lead to, right? Based on what we hear, what will we create, and what will that creation take? That's me.
Merci, Stephanie. 3 minutes, and then we can break.
I just want to let you know some of the opportunities to participate. The easiest one is you're here, you know more than most about what we're working on. And if you find some connection point to what we're trying to accomplish, to share that with others and see if you can help bring them into the tent. Artse United and Arts Pond 8 are our social media platforms. We're on most of them. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're also on LinkedIn and YouTube. The next level deeper is that, plus not just sharing out with others whenever you have time or interest, but sharing some of your perspectives with us whenever you have time and interest, in whatever means that looks like to you, whether it's sending an email or coming to a consultation or having a phone conversation. One of the things that is happening in the very near future, in the next 6 weeks probably, is a public call for examples of what your budgets look like. I don't want to see the numbers, I want to see the chart of accounts. So what's under revenue, what's under expenses? Because we want to build a system that will recognize what you all do for your financial system. So as an advisor, you could either give us examples of how you budget, or connect us to people who have examples of budgets that might be willing to share with us. So basically helping us design or give your feedback on the strategy of how we're doing things, to make sure that we're reflecting, and not just reflecting, honoring and responding to how you want the thing to exist and operate. And we're asking for, the ambassador is just casual whenever you have time. The advisor, we're asking for, come share your thoughts for about a year, whenever you have time. So it could be 6 months apart between when we hear from you, but we hear from you for a little while. The last two levels are deeper, they're about partnership and helping us actually build and manage whatever gets launched. So partnership is we're not asking for any financial contributions from partners, necessarily. Money is always good. In-kind resources are always good, but primarily, contribute to funding applications and strengthening the representation of a community voice. From a strategic point of view, so you might host a strategy session or a meetup in your community, and that would be a multi-year commitment, so more than just a couple months. And then the builder is actually active in the building of, and of the managing and implementation and rollout of what we're building. And that would require a financial contribution. And that's it.